In ancient Rome, a sickly teenage boy named Octavian, feared by no one, would crush every rival and rise to become the first emperor of Rome. In Rome, in the year 44 BC, a frail and often sickly young man of just 18, named Octavian, was mocked by everyone as weak and unimportant. Yet within 15 brutal years, this same Octavian would destroy every rival in his path and make himself the absolute master of the entire Roman world. For Rome, in this age, was a savage place of civil war, where ambitious generals turned their loyal armies loose upon the streets of the city itself. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, in the Senate of Rome, a crowd of senators surrounded Julius Caesar and struck him down with their daggers. The most powerful man in the Roman world was suddenly gone, and the terrified senators fled the hall, leaving only his fallen purple cloak behind. As the news broke, the city of Rome erupted into grief and fury, and mobs surged through the forum as chaos spread street by street. Far away, a frail 18-year-old named Octavian read the message that would change his life and the fate of the world forever. For when Caesar's will was opened in Rome, it revealed a stunning secret. The great dictator had adopted this unknown boy as his son and heir. Overnight, the sickly teenager inherited Caesar's name, his fortune, and the fierce loyalty of his battle-hardened legions. Back in Rome, the tough and battle-hardened General Mark Antony had seized control of the city, and he saw the frail young heir as nothing but a joke. Antony openly laughed in the boy's face and waved him away like an insect, never once imagining that this pale teenager could ever be a real threat to him. But young Octavian was far more cunning than anyone in Rome ever suspected. He went straight to Caesar's veterans and bought their fierce loyalty with gold and his father's name. Then he turned to the old Senate, playing the frightened elders against Antony with such skill that these veteran politicians never realized they were the ones being used. Soon, both men were raising entire armies, and by 43 BC, all of Italy stood on the sharp edge of another brutal civil war between them. Yet instead of fighting, the two rivals made a cold and calculated deal, gripping hands in a tense alliance while hatred still burned quietly in both their eyes. Together with a third Roman general, they carved up the entire Mediterranean world among themselves, three ruthless men now holding the fate of Rome in their hands. Now, holding absolute power, the three rulers began a savage purge, writing down the names of thousands of rich and powerful Romans marked for death. Across the city, soldiers smashed into homes and dragged their victims away as fear and betrayal poisoned every street of Rome in 43 BC. Even the great orator Cicero, the most famous voice in all of Rome, was hunted down and silenced forever, his empty chair left cold behind him. With their enemies crushed at home, Octavian and Antony sailed east to Greece, chasing down the very men who had assassinated Caesar. In 42 BC, on the wide plains of Philippi, two vast Roman armies smashed into each other in one of the bloodiest battles of the age. When the dust finally settled, Caesar's assassins were utterly destroyed, and the empty battlefield lay scattered with broken shields and fallen banners. Octavian stood triumphant over his beaten enemies, and at last the murder of his adoptive father, Caesar, had been fully avenged. While Octavian ruled the Western Empire from Rome, the restless general Antony sailed far east into the rich ancient kingdom of Egypt. There he met Cleopatra, the beautiful and cunning queen of Egypt, and the tough Roman warrior was instantly and completely captivated by her. Antony slowly sank into a life of luxury and endless feasting at her side, quietly abandoning his sworn duty to Rome for Egypt's golden palaces. Worse still, he cruelly cast aside his loyal Roman wife, who was Octavian's own beloved sister, deeply insulting Octavian and all of Rome. Octavian seized the chance, standing before the people and skillfully turning the whole city of Rome against Antony and his foreign queen with furious speeches. By the year 32 BC, Rome officially declared open war hurling a ceremonial spear toward the east and marking Cleopatra's Egypt as its enemy. And now, two truly enormous rival fleets began preparing for one final, decisive clash that would determine who alone would rule the entire Roman world. On the 2nd of September, 31 BC, off the coast of Greece near Actium, hundreds of warships surged together in a massive clash for control of the whole Roman world. The two fleets smashed into each other with splintering rams, soldiers leaping between decks as the sea erupted into total chaos and violence. Flaming arrows set ships ablaze, and thick black smoke rolled across the water as the burning fleets tore each other apart in the roaring fire. Then, in the middle of the battle, Cleopatra suddenly turned her golden ships and fled, sailing her Egyptian fleet away from the fight entirely. Seeing her escape, Antony lost his nerve and abandoned his own struggling fleet, chasing after her and leaving his men leaderless in a fatal mistake. Octavian's ships swarmed the abandoned enemy fleet, and by the end of that day he had won total command of the seas. As dusk fell over the wreckage, Octavian stood victorious, and the once mighty power of Antony and Cleopatra was now shattered forever. In the summer of 30 BC, Octavian marched his legions across the desert and closed in on the great Egyptian city of Alexandria. As the Romans approached, the city fell into panic, and Antony's remaining soldiers threw down their weapons and abandoned him completely. Broken, betrayed, and abandoned by his own men, Antony was falsely told that Cleopatra was already dead, and in his crushing grief and despair, he chose to end his own life. The mighty Roman general, who had once ruled over half of the entire known world, was suddenly gone, leaving only his empty armor and his sword lying behind him. Trapped, cornered, and utterly defeated in her own palace, the proud queen absolutely refused to be captured and dragged through the streets of Rome as Octavian's helpless prisoner. And so, in that same fateful year of 30 BC, Cleopatra chose to take her own life, and with her final breath, the ancient kingdom of Egypt fell forever. Octavian strode into the fallen royal palace of Alexandria as the undisputed master of all Egypt, and now not a single rival was left anywhere on earth to challenge him. Octavian returned to Rome in total triumph, parading the vast treasures of conquered Egypt through the streets as enormous crowds cheered their all-conquering hero. Then, in a brilliant and cunning move, he stood before the Senate and pretended to hand back all of his power, playing the humble servant of the Republic. Grateful and fooled, the Senate begged him to stay, and in 27 BC gave him a glorious new name, Augustus, the revered and honored one. In truth, he now held absolute control over Rome, becoming its first emperor while cleverly letting everyone believe the old republic still lived on. Under Augustus, decades of brutal civil war finally ended, and a lasting peace brought safety, trade, and prosperity to the vast Roman world. He rebuilt the capital in gleaming marble, and it was proudly said that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of stone. Across the empire, temples rose in his honor, and the once frail boy was now worshipped by millions almost like a living god. Yet even the great Augustus knew bitter sorrow. When his own beloved daughter Julia shamed his name with scandal, he coldly banished her from Rome forever. She was sent away to a lonely, barren island, cast out and abandoned by her own father, and she would never be allowed to return home again. As the years passed, the aging emperor grew lonely, haunted by the loss of his heirs and the crushing weight of ruling the entire Roman world alone. Still, his power stretched everywhere, his face on every coin and statue, as he ruled for over 40 long years, longer than almost any emperor after him. Some whispered that his own wife Livia quietly poisoned him to place her son upon the throne, though the dark truth was never truly known. In the year 14 AD, in the town of Nola, the first emperor of Rome finally closed his eyes and passed away at the age of 75. All of Rome mourned as his body was burned, and it was said an eagle rose from the flames, carrying his soul up to join the gods above. The frail, sickly boy that no one had feared had built an empire of marble. that would endure and shape the world for the next 1,500 years. And so, the boy named Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor, a legend whose name would echo through history for the next 2,000 years. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more legendary stories from history's darkest and greatest figures.